Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Let's give people maybe 1 minute to join the webinar. We can see a lot of people joining. I think we are expecting to have approximately 100 people joining today. This is the second webinar. The first webinar we did the same content, same webinar we did in the morning. More Europeans also say session, and now we are repeating the same webinar for the for America's time zone. Let's start slowly. First, I will show a couple of slides about the timeline of the webinar and some rules for it. So this will allow also people to continue joining the webinar and they will not miss anything important. So this presentation today aims to update our stakeholders about the relevant changes in the REDIII in comparison to REDIII with regards to current SBP RED technical solution and particularly our main RED bridging instruction document. This webinar will also try to answer questions about timelines, potential impacts to the scheme, to its stakeholders, our actions plan, and next steps. So we are looking forward to have insightful and interactive session with you today. My name is Roman Polachenko. I'm the assurance manager at SBP, and I will be leading this session today. I will be presenting you these slides, and I will also be the one answering the questions later. My colleagues Alex and Lucas are also attending it, and they will help me to moderate the Q&A session. Before we start, some quick housekeeping items, some rules. So you should be familiar with those rules if you joined our previous webinars. So we have this similar format. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available next week on our YouTube channel. So if you need to leave or you are joining later or anyone from your colleagues couldn't join, then you will have a chance to watch the recording on our YouTube channel next week. Please note that cameras and microphones are disabled during the webinar. Also during the Q&A session, we will ask you to post your questions in the Q&A tab in this MS Teams. So the webinar will consist of the presentation, which will take me 30 to 40 minutes. And then once I finish presenting, we will switch to the Q&A part and we'll spend answering your questions for the rest of the hour. If you have any questions, you can start writing them down in the Q&A tab. So you don't need to wait till this last section of the webinar. If you see a slide, you see me explaining something, you have immediate question, then you can write it down right away. So if you first time using this function, then in your MS Teams window on the top, you should have different tabs, and one usual tab which you use probably for internal communication is chat, but then for this webinar, you shouldn't use chat tab, but please use Q&A tab. So it works that you write in your question, then question goes to our moderators, and then moderators will review the question and then publish it in the common space. So once the presentation is over and we get to the Q&A session, I will start taking those questions one by one. Let's define today's objectives. So we are trying to provide an update about where we are with the REDIII solution in terms of timeline and action plan. We will also provide you draft details about planned revisions, some changes in our normative framework. And we will respond to your questions and we'll use it to prepare the rollout of SBP REDIII solution, which will happen around Q2. And I will say a few more words about the timeline, of course, in the next slides. So here is the outline of the webinar. We will first start from reminding you about the background of this SBP EU RED project. We will then present estimated transition timeline for certificate holders. That's of course critical for certification bodies as well. Then I will provide you a summary of planned revisions in normative documents. why I'm saying planned or draft, because document, as you maybe could have noticed, we haven't published updated region document. It is still in the process of development and review by the European Commission. That's why we are saying that this is planned changes and they are not yet final changes. We will also inform you about some topics which are still open, and we will present you an action plan for coming months to roll out this solution, and also how are we going to search for the answers to those questions. So as I said, I'm estimating that this presentation will take approximately 40 minutes, and then the rest of an hour we will spend on the Q&A. So let me start with some basic background facts related to this project. So we at SBP have a strategic objective to obtain and hold all relevant regulatory approvals, and this includes REDIII, of course. EU RED compliance remains mandatory for all certificate holders when using SBP standards version 2. And that is why it is important to follow for all certificate holders. So you know that currently those who use standards version 1, for them using RED is optional. However, when everyone starts transitioning to standards version 2, RED becomes mandatory. I would also like to add a disclaimer and remind everyone that specific requirements, which you will see in the revised region document and other related documents, they are defined by the European Commission and they are not developed by the SBP itself. So that is very important, that if you see our revised region document in the future, if you see some other requirements, then please remember that this is coming directly from the EU. It may also come as a recommendation or prescription from their contractor organization Guidehouse, who is doing assessment of our work. And yeah, so like we are basically directly told what we need to include in our normative documentation related to RED. Let me present the timeline. So the Renewable Energy Directive, or also called REDIII, was officially published in the Journal of European Union on October 31st, 2023. As per standard procedure, the directive came into force 20 days after the publication. So now member states have until 21st of May this year to implement the necessary laws, regulations, and administrative provisions to ensure compliance. In other words, it is also called as transposition of RED into the national legislation. We work under the expectation that the similar timeline is also valid for European Commission's reassessment of voluntary schemes. So European Commission is currently reviewing all recognized voluntary schemes. There are more than 15 schemes besides SBP, which are recognized by the European Commission, and all of them now go through the process of switching from RED 2 to RED 3. The European Commission informed us that this recognition will not be a totally completely new draft or new blank recognition, but it will be amendment of the existing recognition. That will hopefully make process a little bit faster. So our current recognition under RED 2 will be updated with the RED 3. And then for SBP certificate holders, a 12 months transition period will be in place following publication of our RED 3 documentation. And more details I will present on the next slide. So the publication timeline for the updated SBP EU RED document is currently under review and awaiting approval by the European Commission. We expect this to be finalized in Q1 this year. Late last night, I just received an assessment report from the European Commission, from their contractor Guidehouse, with the results of their initial review. So we have submitted revised documents already back in November last year, waited for a couple of months. So yesterday, they sent us the assessment report. This morning, I checked the assessment report. I can see that there are a few relatively minor gaps, meaning that we will need to amend our draft region document for REDIII in few places. European Commission and Guidehouse are very helpful in terms of telling us quite precisely where the gaps are and how to address them and what kind of normative text we need to integrate into the document. So that leaves us hopeful that we can update our documents next week. And by the end of next week, I'm planning to send updated documents by closing those remaining gaps back to the European Commission. And then we can expect that it will take maybe a few, some weeks, hopefully not longer, for them to actually review those gaps and complete our assessment. So once we publish, then we publish our normative documents. Region document is the main one, and there will be some additional documents. We are currently proposing 12-month transition. So no later than 12 months after the publication of our documents, certificate holders will need to update their systems and switch from REDIII to REDIII. And if they haven't used any RED so far, then of course they can jump on REDIII right away. In the morning session, there was also an interesting comment where we were asked how does this 12 months timeline work together with our transition deadline for standards version 2. So if you remember, we have 9th of November this year as the deadline for everyone to start using main SBP standards version 2. So if we then assume that we can publish REDIII documents somewhere in March or maybe let's say 1st of April, if we give 12 months, then everyone will need to be on REDIII region document by the end of Q1 2026. So that will mean that by the 9th of November, everyone will need to be on SBP standards version 2 and at least REDIII, but then a few months later, everyone will need to be transitioned to REDIII. What is important here is that we are aware that different member states may have different expectations and may put some national timelines on when operators need to start complying with REDIII. So in other words, it can happen that in some member states, operators will be required to start complying with REDIII earlier than the end of our transition timeline. So let's say instead of end of March next year, they can set 1st of January 26 as the end or as an effective date in their country. So in that case, of course, these particular operators will need to work with their certification body, may need to transition faster, may need to cooperate, either including their surveillance audit, or depending on the schedule, sometimes they may need to do a scope change audit to transition to REDIII and not to wait till the end of our formal transition timeline. So now let's take a look at the high-level summary of changes under REDIII. First, we are introducing a new claim. The previous REDIII claim will be updated to SBP EU RED compliant claim. Secondly, the sustainable harvest criteria have been revised with the introduction of no-go areas. This includes specific points from Article 29, paragraphs 3, 4, and 5, which cover agricultural biomass. This will now apply also to forest biomass. There is also some additional minor sustainability adjustments related to, for example, clear cuts, deadwood, or soil quality. Then the third change we will introduce is related to greenhouse gas emission savings thresholds and timelines. So in here, we will need to update our instruction document 6D. If you remember, this is document under standard 6, which defines REDIII or RED in general greenhouse gas methodology. So end users to whom this instruction document applies may need to do some changes and comply with some new requirements. And finally, the principle of cascading use of biomass has been introduced. This is a very interesting topic. I will have a couple of slides later in the presentation. This topic is subject to further clarification from the European Commission and member states. And this also is included in the list of open topics, which we are still trying to clarify. So now let's go over the new EU REDIII claim. So the revised claim is now called SBP EU REDIII compliant. The term EU has been added to the claim. Then we removed the number. So we removed 2 and replacing it with generic term RED. So this will in the future will cover both RED 2 and RED 3. The specific RED version, whether it's 2 or 3, will be indicated under certificate scope. So if you go to the website, you can find it under the certificate record. And then finally, physical mixing of SBP RED 2 and RED 3 will not be an issue. So that can happen during the whole transition period. The only unclear topic maybe remains, what does it mean for operators to actually transition from RED 2 and RED 3? So let's say one process is when you are obviously updating your certificate, you have access in DTS to new claim. Under the certificate record on our website, you will have new bridging document, but then like you may have some biomass in your inventory. There may be some biomass which was harvested and sourced prior to this scope update. So this issue remains slightly open, I would say, and we hope that it will be just taken rationally, and by starting using new claim SBP EU REDIII, we are kind of mitigating this confusion a little bit. So we are basically anyone who will be making EU as SBP EU REDIII compliant claim will automatically comply with RED 2 and RED 3, and that will hopefully make it more straightforward for market participants to understand what they are getting. And then of course, like you can always then check your specific supplier. As you know, in SBP system we have production batch ID, which indicate who is the producer of this particular biomass, and then it is always possible to go to their certificate record on our website and see whether they have officially updated their certificate with the newest bridging document. So now let's go over the amended sustainability criteria for forest biomass. First, there is a greater alignment with agricultural biomass. The criteria for forest biomass have been strengthened to match those applied to agricultural biomass, including the establishment of similar no-go areas and limitations. Then secondly, the introduction of no-go areas now includes primary forest, outgrowth forest, highly biodiverse grassland and heathlands, all of which are now designated as restricted areas for forest biomass sourcing. Then we have new compliance with new threshold for harvesting. So when your biomass harvesting is happening, it needs to adhere to country-specific thresholds related to clear cutting. So local definitions of maximum size of clear cuts needs to be followed. Then again, local procedures or norms for deadwood retention shall be followed, and then other ecological guidelines. Yeah, so all these updates ensure the greater sustainability and environmental protection in biomass sourcing. Of course, we can already see that that will definitely have some impact on sourcing of biomass in some regions, especially those regions where there is quite significant share of primary forest and old-growth forest. Let's look at one example introduced under the new sustainability criteria. So example of the change. So this is the screenshot from our REDIII document where we have a table, a box where we describe sustainability criteria. So based on the REDIII, this criteria is going to be updated. So primary forest and old growth forests are now explicitly defined as no-go areas. This means that harvesting in these areas is strictly prohibited and should be interpreted as an absolute restriction. So that's very important. There is this kind of total, complete restriction to source from those areas. The final text will be presented in the final region document. So once we publish this document in a couple of months, I think, then you will have a chance to actually see the actual text and then start applying it on the biomass producer level. Now let's go over the list of documents that will undergo the revision. Just to remind that we are not only talking about the REDIII. This is of course the first document and the most critical one, but then we also have a document called SBP EU REDD Principles that will receive some very minor update, primarily update in reference to the revised directive. SBP instruction document 6D will be reviewed and updated in terms of greenhouse gas emission savings thresholds and timelines, as I already mentioned. Then we have a document which is called Certification Body REDD Audit Report Template. So this template needs to be used by auditors to document the part of audit when it comes to REDD. So this checklist will be amended, the new criteria will be added, and then certification bodies will be able to take it and integrate into their systems. And lastly, what is very important is that SBP regional risk assessments will also need to be revised. This is, however, our internal revision, and it does not require approval from European Commission. So in other words, if we need to update regional risk assessment for, let's say, Estonia, then this regional risk assessment doesn't need to be submitted to European Commission for approval, but it can be updated following our RRA procedure. However, you can already see that that will probably involve quite some work that will require basically updating the annex in the regional risk assessment annex related to REDD. Today we have annex focusing covering criteria in REDD 2. So this annex criteria will need to be amended, and those sections of the RRAs will need to be updated and then republished. We should also discuss the REDD free application thresholds and its implications. So threshold lowered, the minimum threshold for applying union sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions criteria to solid biomass fuels has been reduced from 20 megawatts to 7.5 megawatts. That will, of course, create increased demand for REDD-free certified biomass. So the directive will apply to more actors. Amendments will be needed in SBP REDD 2 documentation. Primarily, this change will affect instruction document 6D. And of course, this has application for end user sector. And then here I would like to explain few open questions or topics which we are still working and trying to clarify. So first topic would be the use of local definitions for primary and old growth forest. There is still uncertainty on how this should be defined at the national level. So the directive is saying that those areas like primary forest and old growth forest, they become restricted areas or no-go areas. However, European Commission allows to use national definition. And to our understanding, in most countries where this kind of forest become an issue, there will be national definitions which can be used. We also just received the clarification from the Commission where they say that where a definition for old growth forest is not available, at the country level, then the following definition shall apply. And I will read you the definition which has been provided to us. So the old growth forest is a forest stand or area consisting of native tree species that have developed predominantly through natural processes, structures, and dynamics, normally associated with late stage development phases in primary and undisturbed forests of the same type. Signs of former human activities may be visible, but they are gradually disappearing or too limited to significantly disturb natural processes. So the Commission is saying that in case there is no national definition of old growth forest, then this universal generic definition should be used. We also know that there is a definition for primary forest. It is given in the directive, I think in the glossary part section, and that could also be used in case there is no national definition. But we assume that work related to updating regional risk assessments will involve working bodies, local experts who will help us to find those national definitions for primary forest and old growth forest, and these definitions can then be used in updating those specific RRAs. I already mentioned that open topic or like open process is that the documentation review by European Commission is still ongoing. This process is not yet completed. We have received assessment report yesterday, so it will take us some more weeks to close those gaps, resubmit the documentation, and get the final approval from the Commission. Considering that sometimes review by the European Commission takes more time than we would love to have, love to see, then this particular process, I still tend to believe that it will take less time than it took us with REDIII. So currently those gaps, as I explained, are pretty straightforward to fix. We will need to update or copy paste a couple of paragraphs from the Guidehouse report, and then based on that we can resubmit documents. And since gaps are not that or relatively straightforward, then they should be able to review that much faster. So we are really aiming and hoping to be able to publish documents within Q1 of this year and not to delay it further. And then finally, open question where I would like to also spend a few minutes is the cascading use of biomass. So this has not been included in the updated EU RED region document because member states are still in the process of defining the implementation and application of this principle. So that will require a little bit more work. And in the next couple of slides, I will try to explain this cascading principle in few more details. So I know that this topic is being discussed a lot and there's a lot of excitement. However, I can imagine that not everyone fully understands this principle, and that's why we would like to present this one slide to provide a summary of the principle and how it is being presented in the directive. So the bioenergy policies are now aligned with the cascading use principle, which prioritizes material use over energy use. This aims to enhance resource efficiency and promote sustainable circular bioeconomy. This approach ensures fair access to biomass for developing high-value bio-based solutions while maintaining sustainability. Member states are encouraged to take into account sustainable biomass supply, national forest carbon sinks, ecosystems, and waste hierarchy principles when designing bioenergy support schemes. The use of woody biomass should be maximized for its highest economic and environmental value. The support schemes should then target feedstocks that minimize market distortions and avoid unsustainable bioenergy practices, while also supporting biodiversity and climate objectives. Very important is that at the same time, it is essential to recognize national specifics, allowing member states flexibility in designing support schemes that reflect local conditions. derogations from cascading use principle will be permitted in justified cases, such as when energy security is at risk, particularly in severe cold conditions, or where no industries or processing facilities exist to create high-value products from available biomass. So this framework seeks to balance resource efficiency, sustainability, and energy security while allowing necessary flexibility for national implementation. So this is how it could be summarized, the whole intention, the whole idea of the principle of cascading use of biomass. But then next question is, how are we going as SBP approach this topic, and can we help certificate holders to comply with the directive in terms of cascading? So now let's explore how the cascading principles could be implemented in our system. Please note that this slide is just a draft idea and not planned for the actual implementation. So before this webinar, we did some thinking exercise within our technical team, and trying to without going into kind of details of cascading implementation and by the specific member states, we try to think the mechanism how this could be integrated into our existing solution. So first of all, we will develop instruction document which will outline expectations for applying standard 1 indicator 331. So we will work on clarifying existing standard 1, existing indicator 331 when it comes to cascading. Then, of course, we are waiting that cascading principle must be clearly defined and explained by the EU member states. That's very important that the cascading is left to member states to define and implement. Then we assume that each member state will determine how to implement the cascading principle based on national conditions, including whether derogations are necessary. Then SBP will establish a library of national cascading requirements, incorporating specific frameworks such as, for example, Danish or Dutch cascading criteria. So this is just given as an example. We are not aware, and there doesn't exist such thing like Danish cascading criteria yet, but we assume that member states will be able to define the cascading rules in their national legislation, and then we will start creating a library of those different national cascading criteria. So what happens then is that these national cascading criteria will be integrated into the SBP regional risk assessment process through amendments to the EU REDIII annexes in those RRAs. So finally, biomass producers will be able to decide whether to comply with specific national cascading criteria, and this compliance data will be attached to the SBP EU REDIII compliant claim in the DTS system. So in other words, at one point when we will be able to establish a library of cascading criteria by different member states, then these criteria can be used as additional normative requirements to be included in the regional risk assessment process or in the process of biomass producer own risk assessment. In other words, if let's say Denmark will publish their expectations, their cascading criteria, then these criteria can be used by a biomass producer in Baltics or in the United States or in Canada, for example, added to their supply-based evaluation as additional criteria. The risks against these criteria will be assessed either in the RRA by the support from SBP, or will need to be done by the biomass producer itself in case that RRA doesn't exist. And then that compliance can be demonstrated through a normal supply-based evaluation process, and information will be transferred through the SBP supply chain using DTS system. How exactly that will work, we don't know yet. So these are just an ideas, really, and draft. We haven't seen any kind of national cascading criteria yet. It is difficult also to estimate the timeline when it can happen and when we will be able to create this kind of library. So This presentation is just to give you some heads up, some ideas how this could be integrated in SBP system to help our certificate holders, primarily biomass producers, to comply with cascading rules defined by specific member states. So the last slides before we go to the Q&A section, I would like to give you an overview of estimated timeline for our next steps. So the first one is that we had to revise our documents according to REDIII. We have received document from the guidehouse, basically document saying that how they transitioned their directive into the assessment protocol. And then when we received this assessment protocol, we immediately started updating our systems to make sure it's compliant with REDIII, and then submitted it to European Commission. So now we are at the stage when European Commission is reviewing the documents. I already mentioned yesterday we received the first assessment report, and then it will probably, hopefully, it will be not long before we address all the deficiencies and get the recognition. Then next will be that we will publish revised SBP EU RED documents, and these documents will be put on our website. We will inform all the stakeholders, of course, and currently we haven't yet published a normative interpretation, but this is a planned activity that we will publish normative interpretation to allow certificate holders 12 months to transition from the existing REDIII documents to REDIII documents, starting from the date of publication of this ID. And we currently think that this will be audited by the certification bodies against the updated documents during their regular surveillance audits. So that's a summary of steps. This is, of course, estimation, and but we hope it's quite close to the reality. So now we would like to open the floor for any questions you may have. So we covered a lot of important information here, and if you want to clarify something, you have questions with regards to specific topics or components of this presentation, please use tab called Q&A and ask those questions here. So my team will help me to moderate those questions, and we'll be taking them one by one. And just give me a minute to open the tab and see the questions and start answering them one by one. Let me read them one by one. Yes, now I will go down and start from the. All right, so the first question, will there be an option for REDIII and REDIII compliance separately? Not all power plants need to be REDIII, some only from 2030. Good question. At the moment, this option is not expected. So there will be we will make REDIII compliance, so like there will be like mandatory transition from REDIII to REDIII, and I would say this was like a decision made by the standards committee when they made kind of universal decision that SBP standards version 2 need to always carry RED claim. So we assume that this is also valid for REDIII, so it will be just natural progression. However, this kind of question could be brought to our standards committee. So that would be a strategic decision to make those kind of adjustments, and we will make a record of this question, note this question, and definitely discuss it with in the secretariat and committees, and come back with the answer. So thank you for that. Then it looks like there is no current certificate holders in America. What are the specific hurdles for American-based certificate holders, and how can we make this process more streamlined in US-based facilities? We are hoping to pursue certification this year. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I fully understand this question, because we do have many certificate holders in United States, in Canada. This can be found on our website under the tab certification. There are certificate holders, and we have many certificates in North America. We also have certificates in less, of course, but also some certificates in South America. I think I haven't checked the latest stats, but many of those producers in US and Canada, they do also have REDIII in their scope. Then the next question, consultations for the SBP's new regional risk assessments for US Southeast region have closed. It seems that the wide engagement with civil society has either not taken place or excluded critics, especially in the Carolina, Georgia, and Mississippi. Will this affect compliance with REDIII? How can one find out who has been consulted? That's a good question. Thank you very much. I don't think this question is directly related to REDIII. I will pass this question to our team who is working on the US Southeast Regional Risk Assessment to check this claim. When it comes to REDIII, I believe that when we start updating our US Regional Risk Assessment, update the annex with REDIII, there will be another consultation. I cannot tell how long the consultation will be. Usually it's 1 month. So that, yeah, there will be like a chance to actually provide input for stakeholders for REDIII in this consultation. Time-wise, I think if we will start updating those RRAs after we publish our region ID documents, then I think it will happen, in the second quarter of this year. Next question, how will SBP accommodate the power plants which will only need to comply with REDIII from, okay, so that's question we already had. Any insight about member states that make a faster timeline? Yeah, that's a good question. I think all we know, we hear about, I think we hear about Netherlands, where REDIII will become mandatory for operators from 1st of January 26. I think similar timeline is being discussed in Denmark. However, I would probably not speculate here about the specific timeline as it can change. And I think it also depends on the installation date and the capacity, and then there could be some national specifics. So as soon as we get some additional information in this regard, then we'll try to update our stakeholders. I think the best way to get this information would be to reach out to your customers, to end users, and ask them about that. Then the question was aiming to start the process for version 2 certification, REDIII, okay, in March. Am I better hanging off and complying with REDIII as long as I resent before? Okay, it's a good question. So those of you who are planning your audit to transition to standards version 2, of course you are planning to add REDIII, but then we have REDIII on the horizon. For me, it's difficult to recommend anything here. I think that you can expect that by summer, for sure, you should have a combination of our region ID document for REDIII and also regional risk assessments covering REDIII for those countries where we have regional risk assessments. So it may make sense to postpone this transition audit. You would need to speak to your certification body in doing that, because transitioning later, you will, of course, like you will still be, you will still be able to do it next audit. However, you may indeed have a situation where if your audit happening in March and the next audit is also in March, then you will maybe be too close to this timeline of REDIII. So actually talking with your CB about the postponing the audit could make sense. It is increasingly widely recognized that even without climate-related disruption, forest tracts in US and Canada, including plantations, will not recover the foregone CO2 sequestration and ecosystem services lost when clear felt before. Is this a risk for compliance with REDIII? Okay, the extent to which that land is a carbon sink. I would probably hesitate to comment on this specific question because I don't have myself expert knowledge about US and Canada. So the objective of today's presentation was to present REDIII requirements in general. But when it comes to sustainability requirements, then requirements related to forest carbon have not changed. So the forest carbon requirements in REDIII and REDIII will be exactly the same. So we only have changes related to sustainability, sustainable harvest requirements, like those no-go areas, local definitions of clear cuts, deadwood retention. But when it comes again to carbon, carbon on the ground, carbon in the forest, then these requirements stay the same. So the question would be rather generic, or like it would be a similar question for REDIII and REDIII, and I would assume that we will try to answer this question in the regional risk assessments which we are doing for those regions. Then the next question is how does this cascading requirement work in a non-member state? This leans heavily on the waste hierarchy and virgin wood fiber if it's not in the same. Okay. So basically cascading requirement. So that's an interesting question. So that the requirements will be defined by the member states. So like member states will have their own expectations or definition of cascading, implementation of cascading principle. We will. It's a little bit early, I think, to start thinking about it. We will need to see exact cascading criteria developed, proposed by member states, and then these criteria can be then compared or used when assessing the risk in a specific origin country. So let's say if my previous example, if Denmark will come up with the risk assessment, the cascading criteria, then we will try to apply these criteria for United States, for example, Southeast US or Canada, and we'll see how it works. And at this point, I would say it's a bit too early to think how it could be applied. Then the next question is cascading understands uncertainty as the rules from European Commission are not all that clear and national legislation are not ready yet, but very high priority as soon as possible. Did I understand correctly that the Danish interpretations of cascading will be implemented in the Danish RRA as soon as possible? So indeed, I mean, I apologize for maybe not being able to give precise answers right away. I would only say that once we have Danish cascading criteria and it is clear and usable, then of course we will try to initiate the process of updating regional risk assessments. But you need to also think that it's not only about Danish regional risk assessment. It's also about all the countries from where biomass is coming to Danish market. So like if we have end user in Denmark, they of course may be using some fiber from their local sources from Denmark itself in the shape of wood chips, for example, from Danish forests, but they will also be importing from overseas. They will be importing from US and Canada, maybe Baltics and so on. So then actually the regional risk assessments in those origin countries will also need to be updated against this in this case, Danish criteria. Yes, so I can see that Sarah, who is working on our regional risk assessment in the US, is basically asking James to contact her with regards to the US Southeast regional risk assessment. Thank you for that. I think this engagement with stakeholders is very important, of course. All right. Just need to check. I don't see any more questions right now. Yes, I mean, this whole cascading topic is quite challenging, of course. There is a lot of open ends, and that's an absolutely new topic for the certification scheme to implement. You may have seen our working paper on cascading, which we published recently. The purpose of this working paper was not to define cascading in any case, but rather to try to translate rather complex European directive kind of legal text into something more useful, into something more, let's say, user-friendly for people who are maybe not used to read legal text, and then to initiate discussions, to maybe help member states to initiate collaboration and this kind of forum of cascading application. Because the worst what could happen is if all different member states will start implementing cascading principle in very different ways, because that will the biggest negative impact will be on biomass producers, who will today in case of REDIII or REDIII, they have rather straightforward sustainability requirements which they need to comply, and as soon as they comply with those requirements, they can deliver to any of the European member states where REDIII is requested. But if there will be additional requirements for cascading, very different requirements in different member states, then you can imagine that will create a lot of additional work and complexity for biomass producers if they need to start complying with very different application of cascading when they sell to different countries. Okay, we have one more question. When will the criteria for biomass cascading flexibility be fully established, and to what extent will third-party certification bodies recognize and account for these flexibilities? Given the unique regional challenges across different parts of US, how will this consideration be incorporated into the certification process to ensure equitable and practical implementation? So yes, that's a little bit, I would argue, it's a little bit unclear. The member states in the EU, they are the ones who will define the cascading principle application, their own requirements. Then these requirements will need to be applied to the origin countries. So the same example as before, we have Denmark, who will define cascading criteria, and then we have, let's say, Canada or US, where we need to apply this criteria now. So then how much flexibility there will be in applying that, it's hard for me to say. Of course, your third-party certification bodies will play the role when there is no regional risk assessment available, and then when in those, and this is not Canada and US, it's because we are planning regional risk assessments there. In other countries, that of course would be a significant role for CBs, because they will need to evaluate how biomass producer is doing their own risk assessment against these cascading criteria. But in those countries which were mentioned in this question, US, then we are planning to include REDIII and also this cascading principle in the regional risk assessment itself. So, like, to me, certification bodies will not play a role in that process. This process will be coordinated by the SBP itself. So we have our own regional risk assessment procedure. This is how we develop our own official SBP recognized regional risk assessments. And if risk is assessed in certain way in this document, then it needs to be used by the operators, by the biomass producers. All right. So far, thank you very much for those questions. We are definitely keeping track of those and taking notes. Of course, as the whole webinar is being recorded, the questions are also being recorded, and they will be included in our future Q&A documents, and we'll try to find all the answers to those questions and share with stakeholders. All right, so the current view, there's another comment that the current view of Danish authorities that at least inside the EU, that Danish rules will accept the cascading interpretations in the sourcing countries. Okay, that's reasonable approach. So that so like if I translate it, then let's say if someone is from Estonia, Latvia, Germany is selling to Denmark, then Danish authorities will allow local application of or interpretation of cascading to be used. What can be difficult there is that not all member states are very proactive in this regard, and they wouldn't always have their own interpretation, to be honest. So I could already see that there are some countries who are maybe not always kind of focusing on this topic and having their own interpretation. So then if Danish authorities don't come up with those interpretations, then of course it will be difficult. And there's no interpretation in the origin country, then of course we have like a situation where there's no interpretation at all, and we as a scheme will need to figure out whether maybe in this case we will need to introduce some kind of generic cascading principle interpretation, which again I'm just thinking out loud, and but our technical team and our experts may come up indeed with some kind of generic interpretation which can be used in those situations where none of the member states or origin countries have any interpretation themselves. Okay, any regional risk assessment in the pipeline for the UK? Not at the moment. My understanding is that UK is not on the list of the regional risk assessments. Usually when we do regional risk assessments, we try to analyze the amount of SBP certified biomass coming from this particular origin country. And my understanding that the UK, even though plays very significant role as an end user, we have companies like drugs who consume a lot of SBP certified biomass. We don't see many biomass producers there, and perhaps it could be argued that the UK is maybe also not the highest risk country. But we are all the time listening to the industry, and if industry come up with the idea and ideally also financing, then we are very much supportive of developing additional regional risk assessments in new countries. All right. I think that the webinar is coming to the end. I think we should close the Q&A session here. We will allow, of course, we are always open to receiving emails, receiving through other channels information with regards to our webinars, with regards to our plans and interpretations. Also, if you have any specific information on national interpretation of REDIII cascading, maybe something around those no-go areas, please feel free to reach out. Also, I think in today's webinar, we mentioned the topic of regional risk assessment and the engagement with stakeholders. So that is something also where we are always open to receive any feedback from all stakeholders if they feel that they didn't receive enough time or possibility to provide their comments. And our objective, our aim is to make sure that all the comments are taken into account. With that, I would like to thank everyone for joining the webinar. It was really nice to see so many questions and so big interest towards this topic. I can say that we are going to plan another webinar, I think, in coming months to present updated documents, updated systems, because once we publish documents, I can imagine that we may need to do another quick webinar not too long to provide you the final updates, and maybe we'll be able to present some progress with those kind of open topics. But thank you again, and I wish everyone have a good day. And please stay tuned for upload to the YouTube. So once it's happening, we will send email to all participants, and you can go to our YouTube channel and access the recording. Thank you.